The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long golden shadows over the wide open fields. The air was warm but carried a faint chill, the kind that often hinted at a storm approaching. Lila wiped the sweat from her forehead as she bent over the rows of vegetables she had been helping her father tend since early morning. The soil was rich and dark, the crops tall and healthy, swaying gently in the breeze. She had always loved working outside, feeling the earth under her fingernails and the sun on her back, but today, something felt different. The wind had started quietly at first, barely noticeable, but as the afternoon wore on, it grew stronger, rustling through the leaves and making the tall stalks of corn whisper like a sea of green waves. Lila paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. It was turning a strange shade of gray, darker than usual, almost like a thick blanket spreading slowly across the horizon. Her stomach tightened. There had been storms before, of course, but this one didn't feel ordinary. There was a sharpness in the air, a tension she could almost touch, like something was waiting just beyond the hills. She straightened up and wiped her hands on her worn brown pants. "Maybe it's just the wind," she whispered to herself, trying to calm the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. But even as she said it, the sound of the wind seemed to grow louder, carrying with it a strange whistle that made her glance around nervously. She was alone in the field. Her father had gone to check on the animals earlier, and the nearest neighbor was a long walk away. Usually the farm felt like a safe place, familiar and steady, but now it seemed different, almost threatening in its silence. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the edge of the field, breaking through the soft whisper of the wind. "Get inside, before it's too late." It was Mr. Hargrove, the old farmer who lived a few fields over. His voice was sharp, urgent, and carried a weight that made Lila stop in her tracks. She froze, staring at him across the distance. There was no anger in his tone, only a strange mixture of fear and insistence. Her hands tightened around the hoe she had been using, and a shiver ran down her spine. "Mr. Hargrove," she called back, her voice small, unsure. What do you mean?" He waved his arms toward her almost desperately and shouted again. "Lila, I mean it. Get inside your house now. Don't wait another second." Lila's heart began to pound. She had known Mr. Hargrove for years. He was usually calm, slow to anger, and careful with his words. He didn't shout unless something was truly wrong. The fear in his voice was unlike anything she had ever heard, and it made her stomach turn. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to run or stay. A part of her wanted to argue, to ask him to explain, but the look on his face stopped her. His eyes were wide, scanning the horizon as if he could see something she couldn't. The wind had grown stronger now, tugging at Lila's hair and clothes. The cornstalks bent and swayed violently, their leaves snapping in the gusts. Dust and dry soil began to rise from the ground, swirling around her boots. Lila realized with a sudden jolt of understanding that this was not a normal wind. Something was coming, something fast. Her feet moved before she could think, carrying her across the uneven ground toward the farmhouse. The path was familiar, the one she had walked 1,000 times, but today it seemed strange, almost foreign. Every step made her heart race faster. She glanced back once and felt a lump in her throat. The sky was moving in a strange, almost alive way. Dark clouds twisted and churned, spreading quickly across the horizon, and the wind carried a sound like distant rumbling, low and ominous. By the time she reached the farmhouse, her hands were shaking, and her breath came in short, uneven gasps. Her mother met her at the door, concern etched deeply into her face. "Lila, what took you so long?" she exclaimed, pulling her inside. The warmth of the house was comforting, but Lila barely noticed. She was still staring out the window, watching the sky and listening to the wind as it screamed through the trees. Mr. Hargrove had followed her to the edge of the porch, still shouting over the wind. "I told you to come in. Now it's not safe. What's happening?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "Is it just a storm?" He shook his head, his face pale. "It's not just a storm. I've seen this before, but not like this. It's coming fast and it's strong. You need to stay inside, away from the windows, stay low. Don't go out until I say it's safe." Lila's mind raced. She wanted to understand, to make sense of what he was saying, but the urgency in his tone left no room for questions. She felt a mix of fear and confusion, a strange awareness that her world had suddenly become much bigger and much more dangerous than she had realized. As she followed her mother further into the house, away from the windows, the wind outside began to howl even louder. The trees bent and groaned under the force, and the loose boards on the barn roof rattled violently. Lila pressed her back against the wall, trying to make herself small, trying to feel safe. She could hear the sound of the wind and something else. A strange, low vibration in the air, like the ground itself was trembling. Her father came rushing in from the barn, his face tight with worry. "Layla, you okay? Are you inside?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar outside. "Mr. Hargrove, he said we needed to get in." Her father nodded quickly, relief mixed with tension in his eyes. "Good, stay here. Don't go out." Lila sank to the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. Her mind kept replaying Mr. Hargrove's warning, the urgency in his voice, the strange fear that had colored his face. She didn't know what was coming, but she could feel it. The storm, whatever it was, wasn't ordinary, and somehow, just somehow, she knew it could be dangerous. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The wind howled, rattling the windows and shaking the door. Every sound outside made Lila jump. She listened to the way the cornstalks snapped and the trees groaned, imagining the power of whatever was moving across the fields. She thought of her friends, of her small village, of the animals in the barns. The thought of anyone being outside in that chaos made her shiver even more. And then she realized something even scarier. She had hesitated. For a moment, she had questioned Mr. Hargrove, questioned the warning. What if she hadn't listened? The thought made her stomach churn. He had seen something, known something she couldn't. Somehow that knowledge had saved her life. Her fear slowly began to shift into a strange sense of respect. Respect for the farmer, who had acted quickly and decisively. Respect for the power of nature, which could change in an instant. And a deep, quiet determination to never ignore warnings again, no matter how small they seemed. The wind continued its relentless assault. But inside the farmhouse, surrounded by the warmth of her family and the safety of the walls, Lila began to calm, focusing on breathing slowly and steadily. She pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching the trees bend and sway, the clouds twisting in a dark, strange dance across the sky. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how long the storm would last or what damage it might do. But she did know one thing. She had listened when it mattered most, and for that, she was alive. And as the shadows of the day stretched longer across the fields, Lila realized that sometimes survival wasn't about strength or courage. It was about listening, trusting, and moving fast enough when someone wiser than you gave a warning. The storm outside did not wait. As soon as Lila had settled inside the farmhouse, the sky seemed to darken even faster. The sun, which had been low but golden just moments ago, disappeared entirely behind a thick wall of gray clouds. The wind had grown from a whisper to a roar, shaking the farmhouse as though the very earth were trembling beneath it. Lila hugged her knees tightly, her eyes wide as she listened to the terrifying sounds outside. The trees groaned and bent so low that it seemed as though they might snap in half. The distant hills, which usually gave her a sense of comfort and stability, were now hidden behind swirling gray dust, moving like waves in a stormy sea. Her mother moved quickly around the room, checking the windows and doors, securing them with whatever she could find. Her father grabbed an old wooden chair and placed it against the front door, trying to make sure nothing would break in. The sound of the wind slamming against the farmhouse made each small creak in the walls feel enormous. Lila's heart raced. She wanted to look out the window, but a deep, instinctive fear held her back. She had never felt anything like this before. It was as if the wind carried a power she could not see, a strength that was impossible to fight. Outside, the world was changing faster than Lila could understand. Dust and dry soil whipped across the fields in twisting, spinning columns, making the air almost impossible to see through. The cornstalks bent so far over that their tops touched the ground, and the sound of them snapping occasionally made Lila jump. Birds and small animals had vanished from the fields, and the silence of the creatures she normally heard in the distance added to the strangeness of the moment. It was as if the entire world had gone still, waiting for something. "Lila," her father said, crouching down beside her, "I know this is frightening, but we have to stay calm. That's the only way to get through it." She nodded, trying to follow his words, but fear twisted in her chest. Her mind raced with images of trees being uprooted, barns collapsing, and people being caught outside. She thought of Mr. Hargrove and the urgency in his voice. How had he known it would be like this? She had only seen a glimpse of the dust clouds when she ran to the farmhouse, but now it seemed as though the storm had grown tenfold. The wind outside screamed louder, shaking the windows violently. Lila flinched every time it hit. Her mother held a thick quilt tightly over her shoulders, murmuring soothing words that she barely heard. Every gust of wind sounded like a low, angry roar, and it carried with it strange noises, snaps, crashes, and the sound of objects being thrown across the fields. Lila could almost feel the storm pressing against the walls as though it wanted to push its way inside. Then came a sound that made her stomach twist. A sharp, cracking noise, followed by a deep rumble. The sound came from the barn next door, and Lila's eyes widened. She knew that barn well. It was sturdy, built by her father's hands years ago. But even the strongest structure could not withstand the force of what she was hearing. Her father placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be all right. Stay here with us. We'll get through it." Time stretched and distorted. Minutes felt like hours. Lila tried to focus on the familiar sights and sounds of her home, but even inside, the storm seemed to penetrate everything. Dust slipped under the door frame, the wind rattled the roof, and the floor trembled slightly with each gust. She pressed her face to her mother's shoulder, trying to feel safe, but fear had already taken root deep inside her. Suddenly, there was movement outside. Caught in the corner of her vision, something large seemed to roll across the field, a blur of brown and green. Lila gasped, her eyes wide. Her father followed her gaze and squinted, trying to see through the storm. "It's just a tree," he said quickly, though his voice carried a tension that made Lila's heart beat faster. The tree had been uprooted by the wind, spinning and tumbling like a leaf in the air before crashing into the side of the barn next door. The noise shook the house again, and Lila clutched her mother tightly. Hours passed, though it was hard to tell. The storm refused to let up, each gust stronger than the last. Lila's mind wandered, thinking of all the people who might be caught outside. She remembered neighbors who lived alone, small children, elderly people. She thought of how quickly the storm had come, how urgent Mr. Hargrove's warning had been. She realized that life could change in a single moment, that safety could vanish faster than she had ever imagined. Her father went to check the windows, careful not to get too close. "Stay here," he said. Lila nodded, her throat tight with worry. She watched as he pressed his hands against the wooden shutters, making sure they held firm. Every sound outside made her flinch. The cracking of branches, the sudden rush of debris, the low rumble that vibrated through the ground. She felt helpless, trapped in a world that had turned chaotic in a matter of minutes. Her mother tried to distract her, telling stories of when she was young, of storms they had survived before. Lila listened, nodding, but her mind kept returning to the sight of the spinning dust clouds, the bending trees, and the sound of the barn being hit. She felt small and fragile, aware of how powerless she was against the raw force of nature. Suddenly, the wind died down for a brief moment, leaving a strange silence. Lila's heart jumped. Was it over? Had the storm passed? But her father shook his head. "Don't be fooled," he said quietly. "It's not over yet. Storms like this often come in waves. We have to stay alert." Then came the next wave. The wind returned with even greater force, shaking the house and making the walls groan. Dust and leaves tore through the air outside, and Lila could hear the sound of roofs being damaged, fences breaking, and the sharp snap of trees falling. She clutched the quilt around her shoulders, pressing her face to her knees. The world outside seemed like a living thing, angry and unpredictable, and she had never felt more afraid in her life. But as the storm raged on, something else began to emerge inside her. A quiet determination. She realized that she could not do anything about the storm itself, but she could control her fear, stay with her family, and be cautious. She began to notice small details. The way her mother held the quilt, the calm steadiness of her father, the fact that the walls and doors of the farmhouse were still holding strong. These small signs of safety gave her courage, a reminder that even in chaos there were things she could rely on. Hours slipped by. Lila listened to the storm's power, each gust reminding her of how quickly life could change. She thought of Mr. Hargrove again, grateful that he had acted quickly, that his voice had cut through the fear to guide her to safety. She realized that knowledge, experience, and quick action could make the difference between safety and danger, and she silently promised herself to never forget that lesson. Finally, as evening fell, the storm began to weaken. The wind was still strong but no longer screamed with the same fury. Dust settled slowly over the fields. The trees straightened as much as they could, and a strange calm replaced the chaos. Lila looked out the window, seeing the damage the storm had caused. Flattened crops, broken branches, and debris scattered across the fields. The village seemed quiet, as if the storm had taken its breath away. Lila exhaled slowly, feeling her fear begin to ebb. She was still shaken, still aware of how close danger had come, but she also felt relief, gratitude, and a strange sense of awe. She had seen the power of nature, its unpredictability and strength, and she had survived by listening, trusting, and moving quickly when warned. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, smiling softly. "It's all right now," she said. "We're safe." Lila nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She knew that the storm would leave a mark, not just on the fields, the barns, and the village, but on her. She had learned something invaluable, that life could change in an instant, that fear could teach caution, and that courage often meant trusting those who had experience when danger approached. And as night fell, with the first stars beginning to appear through the clearing sky, Lila felt a strange mix of exhaustion and strength. She had faced the storm, even if only as a witness from the safety of the farmhouse, and she had survived. She understood now that sometimes surviving wasn't about fighting. It was about listening, trusting, and acting at the right moment. The storm had passed, but its lesson would stay with her forever. The morning after the storm was quiet, but it was a strange kind of quiet. The usual sounds of the village, birds chirping, roosters crowing, and the distant hum of animals were subdued, almost hesitant, as if the world itself was recovering from the chaos of the night. Lila stepped outside with her father and mother, feeling the uneven soil beneath her boots. The air was cool and fresh, carrying a faint scent of wet earth and crushed leaves. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the lingering tension in her chest, but the sight of the fields brought a sudden sharp catch in her throat. The storm had left its mark everywhere. Crops that had stood tall and proud the day before were now flattened, twisted, or broken entirely. Corn stalks bent to the ground like tired soldiers, and patches of soil were scoured clean by the force of the wind. Branches lay scattered across the fields, some snapped completely, others just partially torn from trees. Lila's eyes followed a small path of destruction, leading from the edge of her father's barn to the neighboring farm. She could see debris scattered across the ground, and she shivered, realizing how close the storm had come to harming people, animals, and homes. Her father knelt to examine a broken fence post, brushing the soil off his hands. "It's worse than I thought," he said quietly, his voice tight with concern. "We'll need to fix this before the animals escape and the fields. We'll have to start over in some places." Lila looked around, taking in the damage, and felt a heavy weight settle on her shoulders. She had never seen the power of nature so clearly before. She had always understood that storms could be dangerous, but experiencing one, even from the safety of the farmhouse, made the idea real in a way that nothing else ever could. She realized that life in a rural village was fragile, dependent on the land, the weather, and the efforts of every person working together to protect their home. Her mother placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. "It's okay to be shaken," she said softly. "We all are. But look around, look at what's still standing. The house is fine, the animals are safe, and we're here together. That's what matters most." Lila nodded, but her mind could not stop replaying the scene from the night before. She remembered Mr. Hargrove shouting across the field, his voice urgent, his eyes wide with fear. She remembered the wind tearing through the cornstalks, the barn roof rattling violently, and the sound of trees breaking under the pressure. She had never felt so small, so fragile, and yet so alive. The memory of fear had been overwhelming, but now it was joined by a new feeling: gratitude. Gratitude that she had listened, that she had run, and that she had survived. The villagers slowly began to emerge, stepping carefully through the scattered debris. Their faces were a mixture of relief and concern. Some were tending to broken fences, others checking on animals, while a few were simply standing still, staring at the destruction and shaking their heads. Lila noticed Mr. Hargrove moving among them, checking on neighbors, his usual calm demeanor returning. When he saw Lila, he gave a small nod. She returned it, her heart lifting slightly. His warning had saved her life. His experience had guided her to safety, and she would never forget that. As the morning wore on, the family began to assess the work that needed to be done. Lila helped her father gather fallen branches and repair broken fences, while her mother tended to the animals, making sure they were fed and safe. The work was exhausting, but it had a strange grounding effect. It reminded her that life went on, that even after chaos there was rebuilding to be done. She felt a sense of purpose in helping, in doing something tangible to restore what had been damaged. While they worked, Lila's mind wandered again to the storm itself. She wondered what had caused it to be so sudden and strong, so different from any storm she had experienced before. She realized that there were forces in the world beyond her control, powerful and unpredictable, and that understanding them was not always possible. What mattered was respect, caution, and the willingness to act when danger approached. She thought of Mr. Hargrove, who had seen the signs and acted quickly. That instinct, that knowledge, had made all the difference. By midday, the sun had emerged from behind the clouds, casting a warm, golden light over the village. The contrast between the brightness of the day and the destruction on the ground was striking. Lila felt a mix of emotions, awe at the resilience of her home and village, sorrow for the damage, and a quiet pride in having contributed to the recovery. She realized that life was full of moments like this, moments where fear and courage, destruction and rebuilding existed side by side. As they paused for a brief rest, Lila's father sat on a fallen log, wiping sweat from his brow. "We'll manage," he said firmly. "It'll take time, but we'll fix the fields, repair the fences, and make sure the animals are safe." "We always do." Lila nodded, feeling the truth of his words. Life in the village was not easy. It never had been. But it was strong, resilient, and filled with people who cared for each other. The storm had tested them, shown them their vulnerability, but it had also revealed their strength. It had reminded them of the importance of community, of listening to those with experience, and of acting quickly when the unexpected happens. The afternoon passed in a blur of work and cautious observation. Lila moved through the fields, gathering broken branches and checking the crops. She noticed small signs of hope amid the damage. A patch of corn that had bent but not broken, a young tree that had survived the wind, a few birds returning to their nests. These small victories gave her a sense of reassurance. Life, she realized, always found a way to continue, even after the most terrifying events. By late afternoon, the village had begun to regain a sense of normalcy. Neighbors helped each other lift heavy debris, repair fences, and comfort frightened animals. Lila worked alongside them, feeling a sense of belonging and purpose. She noticed Mr. Hargrove checking on the barns, offering advice and guidance where it was needed. He moved with calm authority, a steady presence amid the lingering chaos. Watching him, Lila felt a deep respect for his experience and wisdom. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lila finally took a moment to rest. She sat on a small hill overlooking the fields, her legs tired and her hands scratched from branches and rough soil. The storm had passed, but its impact lingered. She looked at the flattened crops and the broken fences, and she felt a mixture of sadness and determination. Sadness for what had been lost, and determination to help rebuild, to learn from the experience and to be ready for whatever might come next. Her mother joined her on the hill, handing her a cup of water. "You did well today," she said softly. "You were brave and you helped a lot. But remember, it's okay to feel shaken. It was a strong storm." Lila smiled faintly, taking a sip of water. "I know," she said quietly. I never want to feel that afraid again. But I also know now that I can survive it. I can handle more than I thought." Her mother nodded, resting a hand on her shoulder. "That's the important lesson. Fear is natural, but courage comes from moving forward despite it. And you've shown a lot of courage today, Lila." As night fell, the village settled into a quiet routine. The animals were safe, the fields were checked, and the houses stood firm. Lila lay in bed that night, her mind replaying the events of the day. She thought of the storm, of the wind and dust, of the danger she had narrowly avoided, and of the lessons she had learned. She understood more than ever the importance of listening, trusting experience, and acting quickly in the face of danger. She also felt a deep sense of gratitude for her family, for the safety of her village, and for Mr. Hargrove, whose warning had saved her life. The storm had been terrifying, but it had also been a teacher, showing her the power of nature, the strength of community, and the resilience of those who refused to give up. And as she drifted to sleep, Lila made a silent promise to herself to always be aware, to respect the forces she could not control, and to act with courage when the time came. The storm had passed, but its lessons would remain with her forever. The days after the storm were long and exhausting, but life in the village slowly began to resume its rhythm. The sky was clear now, bright and sunny, yet the traces of the storm's power were everywhere. Lila walked carefully through the fields with her father, her boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. Broken branches, scattered leaves, and flattened crops littered the ground. It was a difficult sight, and she felt a mix of sorrow and determination as she looked around. The fields were damaged, yes, but they were not gone. With time, effort, and care, they could be restored. Her father knelt down, brushing the soil from a crushed stalk of corn. "We'll start by salvaging what we can," he said. "Some plants are bent but not broken. We'll give them a chance to recover." Lila nodded, carefully straightening a few stalks with her hands. Even though her palms were scraped and rough, she felt a sense of purpose. She was doing something concrete, something that could help bring back what had been lost. The work was tiring, but it had a strange healing effect on her mind. While they worked, neighbors began to arrive. Each carried tools, buckets, and extra hands ready to help. The village was quiet, but alive in a different way now. Instead of the peaceful calm of ordinary days, there was a focused energy, people working side by side, speaking softly to coordinate their efforts, offering encouragement when someone grew tired. Lila noticed how quickly everyone adapted, how each person knew what to do without needing instructions. It was a reminder that the village had survived storms before, that experience and cooperation were as essential as courage. "Lila," called a familiar voice. She turned to see Mr. Hargrove approaching, carrying a bundle of tools. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the same quiet intensity she had noticed during the storm. "Good morning," he said with a small smile. "Looks like you've been busy already." "Yes," Lila replied, brushing dirt from her hands. "We're trying to fix as much as we can before it gets dark." Mr. Hargrove nodded, placing the tools on the ground. "That's the right approach. Focus on what's most important first, the fences, the animals, and the crops that can survive. The rest will take time, but there's no reason to panic. Slow and steady wins here." His words reminded Lila of the night of the storm, the urgency, the fear, and the lessons learned. She realized that survival was not only about acting in the moment, but also about planning for what came next. Mr. Hargrove had experience, yes, but he also had patience. He understood that rebuilding after disaster required both strength and careful thought. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Lila worked alongside her father, lifting broken branches, repairing small sections of the fence, and checking the crops. She noticed the resilience of the plants, the way some of the corn stalks, though bent and battered, had begun to stand upright again. She felt a strange sense of hope in that observation. Nature, she realized, had a strength all its own, and with care it could recover from almost anything. By midday, the sun was high in the sky, and the heat was beginning to weigh on everyone. Lila paused to take a sip of water and wiped the sweat from her forehead. Around her, the village was alive with quiet determination. People spoke to each other in soft tones, sharing tools and advice, making sure no one was overworked. The storm had left a mark, yes, but it had also brought a renewed sense of community. Everyone had seen danger, faced it, and survived together. Now they were united in their efforts to restore what had been damaged. As the day wore on, Lila's father called a brief pause. They sat on a small hill overlooking the fields, tired but determined. "Look at what we've done so far," he said, his voice calm but proud. "It's not perfect, but it's progress. And that's all we can ask for." Lila looked around, noticing the small victories. Sections of fence rebuilt, crops standing upright again, a few trees cleared of broken branches. It was a slow process, but each effort mattered. She realized that recovery was not just physical, it was emotional too. The storm had shaken them, but their work now was a way of reclaiming control, a way of healing from the fear and uncertainty that had gripped them. Mr. Hargrove walked up the hill, joining them. He looked over the fields carefully, then turned to Lila. "You handled yourself well during the storm," he said quietly. "You listened, you acted quickly, and you helped your family. That's something not everyone can do when they're scared. Lila felt a warmth spread through her chest. Praise from him meant a great deal. He was not someone who spoke lightly. "Thank you," she said softly. I was scared, but I also knew I had to listen." "That's the key," he said. "Fear is natural, but action is what saves you." "And you acted. You did more than most people would have." As the afternoon continued, the villagers began to make plans for the coming days. Some would repair roofs damaged in the storm. Others would help replant flattened crops, and a few would check on neighbors who had been more directly affected. Lila joined in, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the strength of community. The work was tiring, but it was purposeful. Each broken branch lifted, each fence repaired, and each plant straightened was a step toward restoring their home. While working, Lila noticed a small bird struggling to free itself from a tangle of branches. Carefully, she reached in and untangled it, placing it on a safe patch of ground. The bird hopped a few steps, then took flight, disappearing into the bright blue sky. Lila watched it go, feeling a sense of triumph and relief. It was a small victory, yes, but it reminded her that even in chaos, life continued, and small acts could make a difference. Evening came slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The fields were still far from perfect, but progress had been made. Lila and her family gathered near the farmhouse, sitting on the porch and catching their breath. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of soil, grass, and the faint smell of wood smoke from neighbors tending fires. Lila looked at her father, her mother, and the distant fields, feeling a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. "Tomorrow," her father said, "we'll continue. There's still much to do, but we've made a strong start." Lila nodded, understanding. The storm had tested them, yes, but it had also taught them resilience, patience, and the importance of community. She realized that recovery was not instantaneous. It required effort, determination, and cooperation. But it was possible, and each small step forward mattered. As night fell, Lila lay in bed, exhausted but calm. She thought about the storm, about the fear, the urgency, and the lessons she had learned. She also thought about the recovery, the work, the cooperation, and the small victories that reminded her life went on. She understood now that challenges were not just obstacles. They were opportunities to grow, to learn, and to discover strength within herself and her community. She thought of Mr. Hargrove again, grateful for his warning and guidance. Without him, the story might have been very different. She realized that knowledge and experience were powerful tools, ones that should be respected and listened to carefully. And she promised herself that she would remember these lessons, carrying them forward no matter what storms might come in the future. The night was quiet, the air calm and cool. The storm had passed, leaving a changed but enduring village. Lila closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and determination. Life had tested them, yes, but it had also shown them their own resilience. And in that moment, she understood that even after the most terrifying events, hope, courage, and hard work could bring the world back to balance. The days after the storm slowly turned into weeks, and life in the village began to regain its rhythm. The fields, once flattened and battered, were showing signs of recovery. Lila walked through the soil with her father, carefully examining each row of crops. Some plants had bent back upright while others needed more attention. She could see small green shoots peeking through the earth, evidence that life had begun to recover. The sight filled her with a quiet hope and reminded her of the strength and resilience of nature. Her father worked alongside her, pointing out areas that needed careful tending. "Some of these plants will recover if we give them time," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "Patience is important. We can't rush nature, but we can support it." Lila nodded, kneeling to straighten a bent stalk or clear debris from a struggling plant. Each small action made her feel like she was contributing to the rebuilding of their world. The village had also begun to heal. Neighbors worked together to repair fences, mend roofs, and clear roads blocked by fallen branches. The sense of community had grown stronger after the storm. People shared tools, offered meals, and checked on one another. Lila noticed how different the village felt now. The storm had been a trial, but it had also brought everyone closer together. There was a quiet pride in the way people moved through the fields and streets, helping one another and restoring what had been damaged. Lila often thought about the night of the storm. She remembered the fear that had gripped her as she ran to the farmhouse. She remembered the wind, the dust, the sound of trees snapping, and the trembling of the barn roof. And she remembered Mr. Hargrove's warning, how urgent it had been, how his experience and quick thinking had guided her to safety. She realized now how important it was to listen, to trust the knowledge of those who had seen danger before. It had saved her life, and she would never forget that lesson. One morning, Lila found herself helping a group of younger children in the village replant some flattened vegetables. She showed them how to clear debris gently, how to support bent stalks, and how to water the soil carefully. As she guided them, she felt a sense of responsibility and pride. She realized that her own experience had given her the knowledge and confidence to help others. The storm had not only tested her courage, but had also taught her how to act with care, patience, and leadership. While working in the field, Mr. Hargrove approached her with a small smile. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "It's good to see young people learning from experiences like this. You'll remember these lessons for the rest of your life." Lila looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've learned so much. About fear, about courage, and about helping others." He nodded. "Exactly. Fear teaches you caution, courage teaches you action, and helping others teaches you strength. Remember these things, and you'll always find a way through difficulties." The afternoon sun warmed the fields, casting long shadows as the day moved toward evening. Lila paused for a moment, looking at the progress they had made. The fences had been partially rebuilt, the crops were standing again, and the animals were safe. The village had survived not just the storm, but also the aftermath. People had worked tirelessly, and the results were visible. Lila felt a deep sense of satisfaction and pride. She understood that recovery was not instantaneous, but effort, determination, and cooperation could rebuild even what had been damaged the most. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Lila's family and neighbors gathered together for a brief rest. They shared stories of the storm, of moments when fear had gripped them, and of the actions that had kept them safe. Lila listened, realizing that each story carried lessons, each memory a reminder of the power of caution and courage. The villagers' shared experiences created a bond stronger than before, a sense of unity that had grown from the storm's challenge. Later that evening, Lila sat on the porch of her farmhouse looking out over the fields. The air was calm and fresh, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass. She thought about the storm, the fear, the urgency, and the lessons she had learned. She realized that life was unpredictable, full of challenges and surprises, and that courage, patience, and careful observation were essential to navigate it. She felt grateful for her family, for her village, and for people like Mr. Hargrove, whose guidance had made a real difference in her life. Lila's thoughts turned inward as she considered her own growth. She had faced fear and uncertainty and had survived. She had learned to trust others, to act when necessary, and to remain calm in chaos. She had also learned that small acts of effort, straightening a bent plant, repairing a fence, helping a neighbor, could have a meaningful impact. These lessons were not just about surviving storms. They were about living life with awareness, care, and courage. The night grew darker and the first stars appeared in the sky. Lila lay in bed, thinking about how far she had come since the day the storm arrived. She remembered trembling with fear, unsure of what was happening, and she compared it to the calm and determination she now felt. The transformation was profound. Fear had taught her caution, action had taught her courage, and recovery had taught her resilience. Her mother came in quietly, sitting beside her. "You've grown so much in the past few weeks," she said softly. "You've learned about the world, about people, and about yourself. That knowledge is more valuable than any treasure." Lila smiled, feeling the truth of her mother's words. "I understand now," she said. "Life isn't just about being safe or avoiding danger. It's about paying attention, learning from experiences, and helping others when you can." Her mother nodded. "Exactly. And you've done all of that. I'm proud of you." The next morning, the village felt different. The storm was behind them, but its impact lingered. Lila walked through the fields, observing the progress made and noticing how the community had grown stronger. People were calmer now, more prepared, and more aware of the power of nature. The storm had been a trial, yes, but it had also been a teacher. It had reminded everyone that life could change in an instant, and that preparation, caution, and cooperation were key to surviving challenges. Lila spent the day helping neighbors and family alike, feeling the satisfaction of tangible progress. She straightened crooked rows, repaired fences, and offered encouragement where needed. Every action mattered, and every effort contributed to the rebuilding of the village. She realized that life was a series of storms, some literal, some metaphorical, and that resilience, patience, and courage were the tools needed to face them. By evening, Lila paused on a small hill overlooking the village. She saw the field standing taller, the fences partially repaired, and the villagers working together with renewed energy. The animals grazed safely, and the sun cast a warm golden light over everything. She took a deep breath, feeling the peace of the moment, and reflected on how far she and her village had come since that terrifying day. For the first time, she truly understood the value of listening, of trusting experience, and of acting with care in moments of danger. She also realized that strength did not come only from physical effort. It came from knowledge, patience, compassion, and the willingness to work together. The storm had tested all of these qualities, and she had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. As night fell, Lila returned to the farmhouse, her mind calm and her heart full. She felt a deep connection to her family, her village, and the land itself. The storm had been a challenge, but it had also been a gift, teaching lessons about life, courage, community, and resilience. And in that quiet, starry night, she promised herself that she would carry these lessons always, ready to face whatever storms, seen or unseen, might come in the future. Lila closed her eyes, feeling gratitude and a quiet strength. She had survived the storm, learned from it, and grown stronger because of it. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that she had the courage, wisdom, and support to face them. And that understanding, she realized, was more powerful than any fear she had ever felt.